Hey everyone, this is Brian with Skipline. Today we're going to talk briefly just about motion sensors, how they work, some issues you can see from them, and then what to check if you think you might be having a motion sensor issue. So the vast majority of paint trucks these days use a aluminum collar on the drive shaft with magnets embedded in it. Each one of these is a magnet, usually 20 to 26 magnets on each one of these collars. These collars are custom made. They're actually milled to your specific drive shaft. So the way it works is as your drive shaft spins, so are these magnets of course, a Hall effect sensor, which is usually this red Hall effect sensor, will pick up the presence of a magnet in front of it. Every time that a magnet crosses in front of this sensor makes this black wire go to ground. Your skip line system picks up that ground pulse and counts it as a distance measurement, but then we also apply interpolation, internal pulse multiplication, some other things, and are able to accurately predict speed and distance to very fine resolution. So each one of these magnets represents about 1/10 of a foot in actual road distance, but we're able to multiply that by a factor of about 5 times. So each one of these to us equals about 1/50th of a foot. Now this isn't the only way that we can actually pick up not only distance but speed from a vehicle. Commonly in the past you would see a disc with holes in it. It's actually a metal disc with holes in it. We use something like this black sensor that would actually pick up each of these holes, like the absence of metal, and give us a pulse, a ground pulse. To us, we see the same signal. It's still a ground pulse. It doesn't really matter for your skip timing system. However, this aluminum collar has proven, over the last 10-15 years to be extremely reliable and durable. There's very few issues. Some issues do come up where a drive shaft might be a little bit sloppy and the two will actually get somewhat misaligned, or we might see sensors get hit by road objects, sensors get backed away, welding damage, you can lose a magnet. Various things do happen, but for the most part these have proven to be incredibly reliable. If you do need to troubleshoot a motion sensor, the first thing you do is go take a peek. Usually this is going to be located somewhat close to the transmission. I mean, kind of center to more of the front part of the vehicle. We usually recommend that these get mounted closer to the transmission to help with the stability, and we'll see less drive shaft movement closer to the transmission. So take a look, just make sure everything's aligned, make sure your spacing's good. You're going to want about 3/4 of an inch spacing with this sensor. You can also check wiring. The wiring can be confusing on these. There's a shield wire that I usually recommend that you just put with the white/clear wire and just take those both to ground. Now on SC12, GC12 we're actually providing you a ground pin. That's going to be pin E as in Edward. So just wire those to pin E as in Edward. The red wire is where we're actually powering this sensor. That goes to pin F on your skip line products. You do not have that pin F on an MST14. On MST14s, you're going to need to run off of your battery 12 volt. So you're actually going to want a regulated version of this. So just request a regulated version of your motion sensor when using MST14. Everything else, the package, the wiring, everything's identical. They just put a regulator in here to help with voltage spikes and dips. And then finally, the black wire is the signal wire. Now this is confusing. A lot of people look at this and think that the black wire is going to be the ground wire. That is not the case. The black wire is the signal wire on this sensor. So that black wire goes to pin G as in George on your skip line products, with the exception of the MST14. On the MST14 it goes to wire 13. On every other product, doesn't really matter if it's SM5, SC12, GC12, it's always going to G as in George. There are other sensors available. We don't really care as long as we're getting those ground pulses, NPN pulses. So as long as the motion sensor is driving the signal to ground, we can use that for motion and speed. That might be an encoder, an optical sensor, pretty much any way that you can get us the consistent ground pulse will work for us. However, this is the recommended and trusted industry practice. It's usually made by some very nice folks in Minnesota, Process Control Systems. They have been a reliable partner for many of the truck manufacturers as well as us. We very much enjoy working with them. You can order one of these custom collars for your vehicle through Skipline or through your preferred OEM. So now, what kind of issues are you going to see without motion sensor inputs? So if you don't have any speed, you're not going to show speed on your display. It's just going to show 0 miles per hour, even if you're traveling. I mean that points to, you know, basically no motion sensor inputs at all. And I can get into some troubleshooting in just a moment on that. But yeah, you will see 0.0. Your screen will actually turn red as well on many systems, or your speed display will turn red. You might now see this gun's waiting for offset distance. This is telling you that that gun, whatever gun you have on, which in this case is gun number 1, that gun is waiting to go a certain distance before turning on. That gun has been told that it might be, 6 inches back on the carriage. So until it travels 6 inches, it cannot turn on. If you are just doing some testing in the shop, this can be very confusing. You think that something's not working. So if you're just testing in the shop, I highly recommend that you go over 1 to quick setup and then go to test mode. That's going to ignore any offsets or displays, or any offsets or delays. And that output will come on instantly. Now the same thing happens with beats. So just so you know, if you are testing with 0 speed, you might not get beat outputs coming on unless you go into the test mode. So to watch those motion inputs come in, you can go all the way over to your setup menu, go down 1 level, then go over to help. It's going to be all the way to the right. Down another level, and then go to input test. Now you can actually see motion sensor inputs coming in, which is very handy for troubleshooting. Now these will come in very quickly, every 1/10 of a foot. So you can really only monitor this, when you're just creeping. So if everything's working correctly, you should see those motion sensor inputs just come in slowly. And that's that pin G that I was telling you about earlier. That is that pin G input. And as you can see, every time that light comes on, that's telling us that we're getting a ground pulse, that sensor is active. If it's stuck on, even when you're creeping, that can point to an issue. If you don't get anything, you're going to need to look at that motion sensor, check the wiring, check spacing, see what else could be going on. On an MST14, that motion sensor is coming in on that wire number 13. On this screen, it's actually going to be this first light. It's going to be pin number 1 on that first screen. Okay, so now you kind of know how these motion sensors work. as well as what to look for if you've got no signal. But what happens if things are erratic? What happens if you are maybe seeing some very long stripe lengths or just erratic behaviors? The first thing you need to check is always the distance between one skip, like the start of the skip, and the distance to the next beginning of skip. So the beginning of one skip to the beginning of the next skip. That will tell you if your motion sensor is in calibration. So it doesn't really matter what the stripe length is. Maybe this stripe is 25 foot long and this one's 15 foot long. I mean, most people just jump to the conclusion that this is a motion sensor issue. Not necessarily. That is why you need to measure the distance between the beginning of one skip and the beginning of the next, regardless of the stripe length. If that is accurate, then you do not have a motion sensor issue. That could point to other issues with gun responsiveness, air pressure, spring tension, other things like that. But as long as the beginning of one skip to the beginning of the next skip is your correct cycle, so in this case 40 foot, then it's very unlikely you have a motion sensor issue. I won't get into calibration today, but motion sensor calibration is guided. You can go to Setup, go over to Calibrations. From here, what you're going to do is you're going to start this guided calibration process by driving a pre-measured course. Highly recommend about 1,000 feet. You can do it with 500 feet. But basically, measure out 1,000 feet. Park your paint truck on a line, and whether it be the front wheel or rear wheel, it doesn't really matter as long as you end the same way. So if you mark the beginning of the course and put your front wheel on that line, drive 1,000 foot and end with your front wheel on that line, the system will ask you how far you drove, and you put in 1,000 feet, and it'll take care of all the calibration for you. Okay, so that concludes this video today. Definitely let us know if you have any questions, anything else you want to learn about motion sensor issues or how they work, or any ideas you might have. Alright, well, thanks for looking at our video today. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time, and be safe out there.